Rory McIlroy took a phone call that changed his season. Phil Mickelson noticed, and what he said next just cracked open a trust problem the PGA Tour cannot ignore. Two of golf's biggest names, colliding over one conversation. A new commissioner caught in the middle. One player getting answers nobody else got. And the man who called it out is someone the tour spent 3 years trying to erase. This isn't gossip. It's a question about who really runs professional golf, and who just gets to watch. Stick with me, because by the end you'll understand why this single phone call might matter more than any tournament this year. Here's what we actually know. Back in March, PGA Tour Commissioner Brian Rolapp called Rory McIlroy. They talked for about an hour. McIlroy didn't hide it. He brought it up himself in interviews, describing an ongoing, constant back and forth with Rolapp since the new commissioner took over. Not the occasional check-in. A running relationship. At the time of that call, Rolapp was about to unveil sweeping changes to the tour, smaller fields, fewer guaranteed cards, a total restructuring of how players qualify to compete. McIlroy heard the outline before the press did, before the Player Advisory Council did, before the rest of the locker room had any idea what was coming. Think about that. The most powerful person in golf picked one player to walk through his entire vision ahead of the group specifically elected to represent everyone else's interests. Not Scotty Scheffler. Not the council built for exactly this purpose. Rory McIlroy. McIlroy called what he heard encouraging, saying the commissioners seemed to understand how hard it is to turn the ship around. Diplomatic. Careful. But nobody pressed him on the obvious question. Why did he get the call first? To understand why that call landed on his phone specifically, you need the backstory. Rolapp didn't come up through golf. He spent 2 decades in football, negotiating television deals and restructuring media rights for the NFL. He was brought in as a fixer, hired to bring corporate discipline to a tour still reeling from the LIV split, shrinking sponsors, and sliding ratings. He started cutting almost immediately. Full-field events dropped from 156 players to 144. Smaller events shrank too. And most controversially, fully exempt tour cards fell from 125 down to 100, meaning 25 players who once had guaranteed status are now scrambling for sponsor invites just to keep playing. The official reason was pace of play. Smaller fields, faster rounds, better broadcasts. Veterans weren't buying it. Lucas Glover called the explanation insulting. Matt Fitzpatrick said pace of play gets blamed every year and nothing ever actually changes, suggesting something else was really driving the decision. Leverage, negotiating power, control over who gets a seat at the table. And right in the middle of that shake-up sits McIlroy, who has his own complication. The tour requires every member to play 15 official events a season to keep full status. McIlroy played 14. One short. Miss the number and you lose automatic entry. You need sponsor exemptions, special invites, permission, for events you used to walk into freely. For the sport's most recognizable face, that's not a footnote. That's a real problem. There is a clause buried in the rulebook allowing the commissioner to waive the requirement for medical issues or, in its words, extraordinary circumstances. Golf analysts have already said publicly it's entirely Rolapp's call, and most expect him to grant it. But almost nobody is asking the harder question. Why does McIlroy get an exception when the player who finished one spot outside the cutoff doesn't? When the veteran who never missed a required start in 20 years doesn't get a phone call, just a form letter? When the rookie who fought through developmental tours to barely hang onto his card gets a renewal notice and a bill? That's where Phil Mickelson comes back into the story. Since joining LIV Golf in 2022 for a reported $200 million deal, Mickelson hasn't been welcome on tour property, officially or otherwise. He's spent years trying to find a way back in, and every attempt has been shut down. For months, he's been dropping pointed comments, never naming McIlroy directly, but leaving little doubt who he means. He's said players will always protect themselves before the game, and that the system has always been rigged in favor of whoever benefits most from keeping it that way. Now, with this phone call out in the open, he finally has something concrete to point to. It's worth saying, Mickelson isn't just a bitter outsider throwing stones. 3 Masters, a PGA Championship, an Open title, a Hall of Fame career. When someone with that resume says the structure is broken, people listen, even people who still resent him for leaving. And here's the twist nobody mentions enough. Mickelson didn't need to dig for any of this. McIlroy told the story himself, openly, proudly even. What he never explained was why the rules that bind everyone else seemed to bend for him specifically. That gap between what was said and what was left unsaid is exactly what Mickelson is pointing at. Zoom out, and this stops being about two players entirely. It becomes about an organization losing the confidence of the people who make it work. Glover calls decisions insulting. Fitzpatrick calls them pathetic. Other stars have used words like selfish and atrocious to describe recent changes. Now add a private briefing and a quiet exemption request into that mix, and you get a locker room asking whether the rules were ever meant to apply evenly in the first place. McIlroy's position makes it messier. He's publicly defended these very changes as necessary, even positive, and then privately asked to be excused from the one rule that would cost him the most. Support the system publicly, seek relief from it privately. That's the contradiction Mickelson has been circling for months, and now it has a specific, dated example attached to it. So Rolapp faces a genuinely difficult choice. Grant the exemption, and he confirms exactly what Mickelson has been alleging, that access determines outcomes more than performance does. Deny it, and he risks alienating the sport's most bankable star right as is trying to stabilize the entire tour. Either decision sends a message to the 25 players who lost their cards, the veterans who never missed a start, and the rookies still fighting for theirs. The message is simply this: does the tour actually protect its rules, or does it protect its favorites? We're going to find out soon. McIlroy's membership status gets decided in the coming weeks, and whatever Rolapp chooses will tell everyone watching exactly whose tour this really is. So here's the real question, not the clickbait version. Should McIlroy get the exemption if nobody else in his position would? And if he does, what does that actually say about everyone still fighting for a spot he's never had to fight for? If you want to see how Rolapp actually rules on this, stick around, because this decision is coming, and it's going to say more about the PGA Tour than any tournament will this year.